You're watching Deconstructing Cravings by Dr. Lissa Gall on Resonance Wellness TV, part of our Whole Life Medicine Alleviate series. Keep in the loop about future webinars and events on whole-life-medicine.com. Hello, and welcome to Deconstructing Cravings. My name's Dr. Lissa Gall, and I will be your guide this evening about this exploration of why we find foods so attractive. And as usual, this presentation is given in the context of the whole life medicine model, which is the model that I use at Resonance Wellness when I'm evaluating your healthcare situation. And today we'll be discussing the ways in which we perceive food cravings. So there's really a number of different things at play here. And so this will be an interesting discussion for sure. I am certain that most of us have experienced the power of food cravings in multiple ways in our lifetimes, both physically and emotionally. And what we're going to find is that you can have missing ingredients creating cravings. You can have root causes for cravings. You can find problems that have cravings as a side effect. Cravings can also be created by our emotional state or our ability or inability to really tune into our bodies, or the tendency we have to just pay way more attention to the external environment. So we're going to take a look at some of these issues. So your body doesn't usually make big mistakes. You don't need to remind your body to breathe or pump your blood or keep at the right body temperature or heal. So I think looking at cravings as signs of weakness or lack of self-control might not be totally barking up the right tree. So the cravings we experience could actually be our bodies trying to communicate something. And sometimes it could be that we misinterpret or embellish the information that we're getting, but it can really be important messages that really help you understand imbalances in your body and ultimately what you need. And of course, we have many common cravings at various times and in various places, and we're going to just cover some of the things that affect our cravings that have some pretty basic lifestyle components, and then some that are not so obvious. So to start with, there are three really important and common factors that play a significant role in a person's appetite. So how much and how often we feel like eating, and how much fuel we actually burn on a day-to-day basis. And these three, and you may have heard me mention them before, are number one, hydration, number two, sleep, and number three, physical activity. So we're going to start with these three. Now, there's more than this, but bear with me while I share the awful truth about some of the things that we do that have a huge impact on cravings. So I could probably spend all of our time together discussing the importance of proper hydration. I may have even done an hour-long webinar on this before. I'm pretty sure I mention it most times. But water is really needed for all of the cells in your body, as well as for the maintenance of the environment where all of your body functions are taking place. And you lose water through breathing, sweating, digestion, being in our environment where we live in a bit of a humidity desert. So most people cannot easily distinguish between thirst and hunger. The first thirst reflexes fade relatively quickly, even if somebody is chronically dehydrated. So that can lead to this feeling that you need to consume something, quote unquote something, and you just might head for a snack instead. But it's actually been shown that drinking 500 milliliters of water 20 to 30 minutes before a meal substantively reduces the food intake in that meal. And studies have shown that doing this as a habit results in a normalization of weight, even if nothing else is done lifestyle-wise. That's a really big and key piece of information for many people who are not in this practice. So 500 milliliters of water is about 2 cups, which is not a small amount. But you'll have to remember that you actually absorb water quite readily from your stomach, especially, if you're in the habit of put a little bit of salt in there, you won't immediately pee it out. And that's a lot of a shift in terms of a study that to show how big of an impact that actually has. So the average amount that people require for each day is roughly a third of your body weight in pounds and ounces. So if you're 150 pounds and 50 ounces, that's about 1.7 liters. 180 pounds, around 2 liters. So if you exercise, that amount goes up by 5 cups or like 1.25 liters per hour of exercise. So it can, if you are very active, then probably the top max is going to be about a half of your body weight in pounds and ounces. So if you do have this inkling that you're not the best water drinker, one of the biggest ways you can reduce kind of like fishing around for a snack is to literally just drink water first and then see if you still have the inclination to have a snack. Could make a huge difference for you. So as soon as you get a craving, drink 2 cups of water. Now, even though I do tell you a lot about this, I, at the office, am not always the best water drinker. In between the morning before I get there, I'm great. Then lunchtime, I'm usually pretty good. And after work, I'm pretty good all the way into the evening. But the times where I see patients, I'm sometimes not the best water drinker. And so I decided to change that recently. And so I got a new water bottle that actually measures how much I drink as I'm drinking it. It's like an electric bottle. So it's called a Hydrate Spark. And actually, one of my patients told me about this a couple years ago. And although I'm a good water drinker, I didn't really think I was going to need that. But I bought myself one recently, and I've been experimenting with it. And what it kind of tries to let you know is when you haven't taken in much water, and it measures how much you've taken in and keeps the total running for you. And you can add other beverages in there that don't count necessarily, but it's actually, if you're really not great at drinking water, this bottle flashes a light at you and text messages you to tell you, hey, you have not drunk enough today. So if you're one of those people where this is a real issue, this hopefully this will slightly motivate you. And also potentially, like I said, you can buy yourself a Hydrate Spark. Now, the second most important part is sleep issues. So the less sleep you get, the hungrier you will feel. So if you sleep less than 7 hours a night, that's linked to increased appetite and decreased energy expenditure. So you basically burn less calories in a day when you don't sleep well. So you combine those two things, and there's obviously a risk of weight gain over time. So lack of good quality sleep really affects your appetite regulating hormones. One's called leptin, one's called ghrelin. There's other hormones, but these two main ones are very affected by sleep. And these hormones tell you when you are full. So leptin goes down when you're full, and when you're hungry. Ghrelin goes up when you're hungry. And you can see here on this little diagram, before eating, ghrelin is low, leptin is high, and then when you've eaten, it should switch to be the other direction. So this is actually what happens just by eating, but you're affecting this also with sleeping. And you're modifying these effects of these hormones. Lack of sleep also affects blood sugar control. It increases insulin production, it decreases insulin sensitivity, and as a result, you'll often feel like you're low blood sugar, even if the amount of blood sugar there is technically normal. So you'll again have an increased appetite. This is another effect of sleep, completely independent of the leptin and ghrelin. Even in kids, a lack of sleep statistically will predict later weight gain in life. So it's really important to cultivate sleep habits if sleep is an issue for you. And if you're a poor sleeper, you might want to consider at least temporarily napping to reduce this effect while you build a better sleep strategy. Now, not everybody has the opportunity to nap. But if you do and you have sleep problems, this is one way of temporarily helping you with this. When you are tired, there are certain things that you will typically be attracted to cravings wise. So people love caffeine when tired, but often that comes with other components, like sugar and dairy. So Starbucks, that Starbucks drink you drink could be 800 calories if you're not watching. And so you're adding caffeine to a bunch of other snacky things. Another category fatigue makes attractive is the high carb food like pasta or potato chips or bread or baked things. There's nothing wrong with eating some starch, but a meal of starch when you're tired can quickly increase your overall energy intake to above what you really need. And part of that is the craving for it. Cravings for chocolate can also increase when you're sleep deprived. So if you find yourself like heading to Starbucks, it just tells you you're tired, and this is actually having an impact on your internal hormonal regulation of your appetite. When you're tired, you're also most likely to like crunchy things. So a lot of the crunchy snack foods are super calorie overkill. So if you're tired and you are, then a couple of coping strategies to deal with the cravings in the moment are eat a snack you can eat a high volume of without a big energy load, right? Like celery or cucumbers or peppers. So a lot of my resetters in this crowd may know that this is part of a hunger strategy. Number 2, eat something that's crunchy. So that can also be like celery, cucumber, and peppers, but it could also be things like apples or cherry tomatoes, something that kind of makes your jaw work a little bit. You might also want to just eat something with a little bit of a comfort food quality in the taste, but maybe it's a better quality, like a green pea crisp or a popcorn, a little freeze-dried fruit, something where it makes you chew a little, like a bean chip, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to eat a whole bag. But this is one of the things that people will be after when they get tired. And it's been shown that crunch is neurologically feeding back again to all sorts of hormones and neurotransmitters. And most people will be after those when they're tired. The next thing is exercise. So your appetite hormones are directly affected by exercise type and intensity. So ghrelin, so that hormone that makes you hungry, is suppressed after you do something strenuous. And leptin, the hormone that makes you feel full, is also increased after exercise. So this actually creates an appetite suppression, and it lasts a length of time that kind of varies with intensity and duration of a workout. So a full suppression of your appetite would take about 60 to 90 minutes of exercise. But exercise regularly, even if it's not that long, will decrease your need to graze overall. So that's especially helpful if you do the exercise, obviously, earlier in the day. But, sometimes you could do an exercise because you're more of an evening snacker and you can manage it that way a little bit better. So maybe after your dinner has digested, you go for, a walk around the neighborhood or a walk on the treadmill if it's minus 21. And just make sure that you're changing your appetite hormones. Exercise also has effects on a nucleus in the brain. It's called the arcuate nucleus. And there are neurohormones there that signal hunger. And you're going to reduce those neurohormones. So there's more than one mechanism. And people vary a great deal in how much exercise has this effect. So the more consistent you are with exercise, the more predictable that effect comes. And the variance can have to do with a number of different things like inherited tendencies. We're going to talk a little bit about inherited tendencies in a minute. And doing something you really like for exercise is a brilliant strategy to keep yourself consistent, because if you like it, you're more likely to do it. And then if you're more likely to do it, you're more likely to also improve your appetite control this way. Exercise can really help to maintain a weight loss over time when an exercise is matched to you. So it's very encouraged to develop an exercise habit or routine for yourself, post a reset as an example, because at the end of the day, it's partially that's going to carry you after you've gone into the maintenance strategies that we have after your weight loss. But even if you haven't been on a reset and you want to learn how to control your appetite a little bit, this is one way to do it. Now, obviously, dehydration and inadequate sleep and exercise habits are big drivers of lifestyle. Those really are going to contribute to cravings. But there's also a few common habits that people have that contribute to cravings. Being unprepared to eat a proper meal is a huge problem. So for lots of people, that's a shortage of cooking skills. For others, it's poor grocery shopping or planning skills. You actually have to cultivate ways to keep a healthy and balanced diet. There is every distraction out there just waiting for you. So when you forget to take something out of the freezer to thaw, or you didn't buy enough components to make a proper meal, or you don't have the meal components that take lots of time, at least partially prepped, it's an issue, especially when you're tired. So I've already done a whole hour webinar on the art of meal prep. So that's on the Alleviate replays. We spent an hour looking at how to deal with this problem. So if this is you, go check that out. Also, there's produce storage 101. So if you're not great at putting things away and keeping them from rotting in the bottom of the fridge, you want to learn how to keep your items properly stored and then just are ready to go. So learning what places you can choose something healthier is also a good skill set, because there's always times where you're going to, despite all good intentions, find yourself coming home at 7 p.m. starving. So remember that a restaurant is not invested in you living a healthier lifestyle, usually. So they serve what people pay for. So you got to figure out where you can get a healthier last minute food when you find yourself unprepared. I'll give you an example of one of the ones we use. We sometimes, under those conditions, will order from a shawarma place a shawarma salad. So it's basically like meat on a stick or off a stick on a green salad. And that is pretty okay. And we haven't like gone way off into left field, right, with something. And if you look carefully, you will find places where you can get something where you could choose it, and it's not going to have fries on it, or it's not going to be fried, or it's not going to be in a drive-through necessarily. So those things are there, and you just have to look for them. But the majority of places, that's not their interest area. So you have to be careful about it. I think the other piece of that is finding balance, finding a balanced plate. So your intake of protein and fat and carbs satisfies you. It's also a huge problem. How many people have experienced that kind of I am full but do not feel satisfied feeling? That tells you your meal wasn't balanced. We've talked about this a lot of times, but here is the suggested balance for the average person. And notice I say average. There are modifiers to this depending on what you've inherited. So you can see that the proportions here are about a half of what you eat in a day, non-starchy vegetables. So that can be like salad or cooked vegetables or crudités, however you like to do that. 25% should be proteins and fats. So meat eaters will get both protein and fat in both their meat and fish. If you're vegetarian, you will have to cultivate more proteins and fats. And for the average vegetarian, that's a lot of tofu, beans, nuts, and seeds to make complete proteins. Most vegetarians I know undereat, and this actually makes them starve to death. And then they wonder why they're eating 6 bags of chips at the end of the day, because they ate so healthy the rest of the day. Well, they didn't eat the right balance. They ate healthy foods, but they didn't eat the right balance. 12% fruit. So ideally fruit in season should be eaten every day, but not a huge, it's not going to replace your non-starchies. It's a small wedge, but they contain a whole bunch of cofactors and nutrients that you don't get as high in the vegetable set. 12% starchy veggies and grains. So starchy veg is often something that at a restaurant you find is the underpinning of a meal. So potatoes or rice become an underpinning to a meal. But most people actually don't do well with proportions like that unless they are physically working very hard in a field. And there are places in the world where rice is the underpinning of a meal, but those people are working physically hard. Most of us are not. I would be hard pressed to remember the last time I worked hard, like with a shovel. Maybe last summer, and maybe not for very long. So, and exercise, of course, can balance this out a little bit. And you will find that if you're a high performance athlete, then a certain amount of starch will also be required, but it won't be as high as most people think it is. And then last but not least, a percentage point of ferments, salts, and seaweeds. So those are just great ways of making sure you're supporting your microbiome, which is a huge part also of cravings. We're going to get that in a second. And then making sure you have enough electrolytes with your sea salts and seaweeds. If you don't mind seaweed, there's a great profiles of nutrients in those. So eating a balanced meal, maybe with a little bit of wiggling room for who you are, makes a big difference. So like I said, genes do play a role. They do dictate pieces of what your diet should look like. So your genes can make you starch intolerant, more likely to be starch intolerant, or gluten intolerant. They might show you that you can't take in as much saturated fat as is typical in a Canadian diet. They could increase the likelihood that you would do well or poorly at intermittent fasting. And if you missed that, I did an hour-long lecture on fasting, also on the Alleviate replays. They might indicate a likelihood of having really poor blood sugar control or a limited uptake of certain nutrients. It can tell you how likely you are to detoxify things properly and what kind of exercise you should focus on. So this is the reason why I offer genetic SNP testing, both in the office and in the Aligned Resets as an option, as well as metabolic typing. So you can really start to understand, what does the best diet look like for you? And this has a huge impact on cravings, because when it's balanced for you, you're not going to feel like you're in the fridge all the time. One particularly influential gene here is the FTO gene. It's also known as the fat mass and obesity related gene, or horribly, the fatso gene. I don't know. I don't think it's exactly correlates to that, but you can see it sometimes referred to as this. So if you have this gene, it's actually related to methylation reactions in the expression of other genes that affect food intake and eating behaviors. So research has found that the FTO gene expression affects areas of the hypothalamus. And if you have this gene, fasting is actually a great idea for you, because having a low saturated fat, lower calorie diet with good protein intake is best matched to having this particular gene. And in Africa, this gene is actually found in some populations at 75% of the population. But the African diet historically has naturally kept that expression in check. But move that same person to Canada, and that diet triggers the worst case risk of obesity and conditions like type 2 diabetes. So there are things that we can test for that say a lot about how to make things custom for you. So if you have that kind of data hanging around, like you did a 23andMe or something like that, bring that in, because if we sit down together, I can usually tell you what that looks like for you. So big role. There's more to it than that, but we just don't have time to go into that today. So another issue is not eating regularly, whatever that means for you. So some people need 2 meals a day. Some do better with 3. Some people need snacks. Taking a break to eat a proper meal, even if you're busy at work. So many people feed themselves poorly in the interest of work, but you are no good to anyone if your brain isn't getting enough fuel. So your work can't be that good under those conditions. I hate to tell you, skipping lunch, it shouldn't really be an option. Humans generally operate best with predictable meal times. It helps you to maintain your circadian rhythm. So remember how sleep is also a big factor in cravings. So you want to find a rhythm that works for you and then do it, and then maintain it, even during travel if you can. So there's some thought that some of the jet lag effect is actually the change in sequence of when you eat. Now, there's going to be times you travel to places where, you can't be eating in the middle of the night, obviously. But you might find that in the transition, if one of your meals is timed as close as you can get to the way it's timed at home, your body may also adjust a little bit better. So when you combine irregular eating with not so great choices, you create a whole other level of problem cravings. And I do want to talk to you about engineered food, processed food. There are many foods literally engineered to make you eat as much as possible. There are actual food scientists paid to make sure that what you get in a processed food has a particular mouthfeel, a particular smell, a literal change in the structure of chemicals that stimulate taste buds harder and faster, and even the addition of chemicals that are known to trigger really intense pleasure responses in your brain. In the food industry, that's known as the bliss point. So you're pretty much helpless in front of that kind of food. You know, combinations of fat and salt, fat and sugar, with that added easy breakdown of simple starches used super liberally in processed food, do not stimulate normal satiety signals. In fact, they typically do the opposite. That's why you can eat an entire bag of chips. You know, the ghrelin, which is the hormone that signals hunger, is increased when you eat these foods, not decreased. So you want to eat it even when you're full. That is not a mental weakness. Those are efforts meant to sell food products, not feed you. So I would say most people are completely unaware of how significant of a contributor food engineering and marketing makes on food choices. And it starts young. You know, the food industry spends $2 billion per year marketing to your children. Just imagine what it spends marketing to you. In addition, if you put food additives into a food like that, you can directly impact the hormones of hunger and satiety. So things like MSG, high fructose corn syrup, even elevating the amount of gluten in bread can have significant effects. So don't make the mistake of thinking that those things aren't designed to put you right where they want you. You would be stunned at how many food scientists there are. There are even professional tasting people that will work with food scientists until they have the combination so irresistible, they just know people will open a bag and finish the whole thing. Because why? Because that actually increases the amount that you buy. And that's the whole point. It isn't about feeding you. It's not about you being healthier. It's about selling the next bag to you. So if you get into a little bit of a sticky wicket with this, you know, just look at some of the things that we do as Canadians. We have a whole chain of donut stores across the nation that makes us feel like we're at home, right? Tim Hortons makes you feel at home. When you come back from wherever you've been traveling and you see a Tim Hortons, there's just kind of like that inner sigh of, okay, I'm home. And, you know, just like hearing French on the plane. But they're designed around this homey, comforting, everything's the same, you know what to expect, and then it has these highly addictive qualities to it. So make no mistake, these things are engineered for you to like them. And it is not really your fault that physiologically you can't resist. So you have to use your noggin a little bit and realize what that is and choose to limit those things in your diet. And you don't have to say, you know, I can't eat that thing. What you say is, I'm not a person who eats that kind of food. You got to put it in a way where you can really own it as a positive statement, because there's one on every corner. Now, hormones are special chemical messengers. They play a major role in a lot of our major bodily functions. So we have about probably 50 different hormones. And when they're balanced out, hormones do help your body thrive, but excesses or deficiencies can trick your body pretty easily. And hormonal cravings can be some of the most unique cravings. So in other words, they can produce cravings for foods you've never even liked before. So pregnancy is a great example of that. You know, where we hear of women craving things that they've barely ever even registered on their radar before. But there's other examples too. So like as an example, when thyroid function is low, People will crave caffeine and breads and sweet starches. And when the adrenal is too low, there'll be a craving often for salt or meat. When the pituitary is low, you see cravings for a lot of dairy products usually. And if the ovary or testes in a man are low, you'll crave spicy things or very rich foods like cream sauces. So they kind of like temporarily drive the functions of those hormones and those tissues, but then you come out on the other side of that just in a bit of a loop. So we can also see cravings during rapid shifts in hormones that are not in balance, like just before a menstrual cycle. So not everyone has those cravings, obviously, either. So balance is probably key, but many people are familiar with cravings under those conditions. So if you notice that you have cravings around your cycle, or you have particular kinds of cravings, like I said, there's some pretty common streaks through things that if you keep eating them will overstimulate a gland as well. So a great example is thyroid again. So if people have low thyroid conditions and you're pumping in caffeine and bread, then you're going to overdrive the thyroid and actually make it not as functional long term. Now, you're not going to wreck your thyroid overnight or anything like that, but you get caught in a little bit of a cycle trying to drive it forward a little bit instead of finding the things that actually support it, which is more likely to be a protein-rich diet with not as much starch, honestly. So those are your hormones. Now, you can also have impacts on your hormones when your liver function is not super great. So sometimes people will find that their hormonal problems actually really stem from poor digestive processes. And that's the next thing we're going to talk about here is the gut-brain axis. So in particular on this slide, I want to talk about the microbiome. So the microbiome also shows control over craving behaviors. Different bacteria are after different things. And your microbiome is basically the mix of all the bacteria in your system, what the populations look like. And your microbiome is inherited. So you can actually tell who is related to who by doing a microbiome analysis, like a genetic microbiome analysis. That's actually a better predictor of who's related than your DNA actually is, which is slightly scary to think about. That's how specific your colonization is to being exposed to your family microbiome. And of course, your family microbiome for a lot of Canadians comes from a different country with a different set of foods and other things like that. So we're all moving here and our microbiomes do adjust somewhat, but remember that you are inheriting it and you don't just become sterile and start over again when you come to Canada. So different bacteria are after different things. They communicate through your gut nervous system, which is mostly your vagus nerve, to tell your brain about what they want you to eat. So in addition, what you eat can have an effect on your microbiome, and that can also create problems. So for example, if you eat a lot of food additives, in particular emulsifying agents, so there's a couple of them. So emulsifying agents are things that mix fats and fluids together. So a really good example of that is prepared salad dressing. So in prepared salad dressing, you'll get an emulsifying agent. And it's meant to keep those things mixed so that they don't separate in the bottle. What it also does is it serves as a bigger carrier for oils so that you can break them up and digest them faster. You actually get more oil out of it that way. So there's other agents that are mixed into foods, things like carboxymethylcellulose. Most people have probably seen that. Or polysorbate 60 is another one. Or sorry, not 60. I think it's 80. The problem is that those kinds of emulsifying agents increase the penetration of microbes into your intestinal tissues. They get too far into your intestinal tissue than they're supposed to. Because your biofilm gets interrupted. Because your biofilm, also that emulsification agent can actually almost like melt a little part of your biofilm that's protective between your bacteria and your gut wall. So this is another argument for not eating processed stuff. and for making your own salad dressings or to just pour vinegar on it instead. So when you do something like this, you remove a portion of your own biofilm and you create a localized invasion, it'll increase inflammation because they don't belong there. And that can directly lead to overeating, weight gain, and poor blood sugar regulation. This is shown in studies. So a balanced microbiome reduces that effect. So things that you can do to improve your microbiome that many people don't do well is make sure to eat fiber. Again, your non-starchy vegetation and foods that are prebiotics like garlic and ginger or ferments can really help encourage this. Now, you don't want your whole diet out of those things because if you eat a lot of that, you will also have an issue with too much gas and other things like that. So, and if you have a lot of trouble with your gut, you might consider some microbiome testing. That might be in order. But the nervous system of the gut also tells your brain how full you are with stretch receptors and chemical receptors. So it's also part of your emotional response that can lead to eating behaviors, the nervous system of your guts. So if you have an argument with someone or you feel powerless or ungrounded, you can get cravings to shut up those feelings. You just basically eat to shut it up. Right? And if you eat a quality food where you're not getting that full stretch response or you're not getting the full chemical response, that also makes you feel less full. So this is another part of the feedback mechanism. And like I said, you can't sometimes determine if there's an emotional charge to it or a physical part to it because we don't have little ticker tapes coming out of our belly buttons that say, oh, guess what? You didn't eat enough fiber or something. You don't have that ticker tape. I wish people had those little ticker tapes. That would make my job a lot easier. But it's a really important aspect of cravings because if you don't have balance in this particular area, you can also contribute to weird food things. Now, another part of this is the balance between energy and reward. That's mediated by neurotransmitters. Now, it's so easy and cheap to get calorie-dense food that there is a tip towards the reward system over the energy balance system, right? So the reward system is how good something makes you feel versus did you take in the amount of energy that you needed? So if you don't have great regulation in some of your neurotransmitter systems, so the system that's shown on this slide is actually the dopamine system in your brain. It can easily result in addictive eating behaviors because in somebody who has poor dopamine responses, willpower won't be enough to stop the reaction that you want to eat. Only learning how to be mindful and balancing the neurotransmitter system can work well. And so that can take specific supplements to do that, depending on the person, and also training yourself out of certain eating behaviors. So some people keep their kryptonite in the house and they keep circling back to it over and over until they've polished it off. So that is often a neurotransmitter issue. It's not a willpower issue. It is not putting the kryptonite in the house in the first place if you haven't learned how to handle things a different way. So different cravings result from problems with different neurotransmitters. So usually people with unbalanced dopamine crave chocolates, sweets, starches, aspartame. Like these are people who are drinking 10 diet pops, all the way to certain drugs of abuse like cocaine. So these kind of problems can usually be rectified with proper dietary habits. And like I said, supporting neurotransmitters more specifically. And there are other neurotransmitters as well that can have an influence. Different neurotransmitters end up translating into different kinds of cravings. And a lot of this is wound into how good you are at digestion. So this is like, these things kind of come around in circles. They're looped together. So if your digestion is not really great and you don't liberate protein well, so say you have a low stomach acid or you've historically taken acid suppressing drugs for your stomach, you just terminated with those drugs the first step in protein digestion. And the other steps are related to how well you've done the first step. Now, we've also done some webinar time on digestive normal digestion, like what does a normal digestion look like and what should happen at each step. But if you have a serious stomach problem, you can decrease the amount of bioavailable amino acids that you actually need to make neurotransmitters. And it can be a huge problem for people who've had long-term digestive issues, or like, let's say somebody who has a malabsorption disorder. So even in a person who has discovered they have celiac, if they did enough damage to the overall absorptive surface size in their body, they may not actually, even if they're doing a relatively good at digestion, they may not be able to take up all of those amino acids in a timely enough fashion to keep your head and your nervous system supplied. So there are times where, depending on what it is that you're craving, we can actually put in certain kinds of amino acids. Now, our bodies are much more in tune with nature than you give them credit for. So we have the privilege, obviously, of whatever food we want whenever we want it. But it's no surprise that there's often seasonal variations in cravings in whatever the natural time of year are. So common cravings in the seasons would be like in the summer, having cooling foods like raw vegetables, fruits in season, ice cream. In spring, people are more into citrus and leafy greens, the detoxifiers often. In fall, something that really feels grounding like squash and nuts, where you're kind of putting away fuel for the winter. And in winter, hot and more fatty foods like meats and oils, some because of the temperature and some because you actually have to generate more heat in the wintertime. And there's actually also evidence that cold temperatures by themselves stimulate more food intake, but there's lots of variables. It's not perfectly correlated, especially in Canada where you spend so much of your year indoors. I mean, it's not like in today's weather, which was minus 21, everybody's outside trying to make sure that they get their vitamin D. I did not see very many people out today, I'm going to have to say. And probably with good reason. You can also get a little frostbite, but you can also feel sometimes when you're out doing a winter sport, that actually increases your hunger. And it's probably because you do actually need more fuel to maintain a certain temperature. And you're going to notice that. So that said, there's a considerable body of evidence that shows that even a short exposure to a natural environment is associated with a reduction in negative emotional states. And the more frequently a person makes like a recreational visit to a natural environment, the lower their odds of exhibiting depression. And when you have a lower amount of depression, you will reduce your stress. And when you reduce your stress, you actually change your craving. So in short, if you're given this relationship between the affect and craving, if people with greater exposure to natural environments will also have a lower frequency and intensity of cravings because they generally have lower levels of negative emotions or negative affect. So if you are also not a big outdoors person, even if you're in an environment that you can at least go out for 15 minutes in a day, maybe expose yourself to sunlight, or if there's not sun, to at least be outside in a natural environment, you will usually, like I said, even in short 10 to 15 minute exposures, this has been shown, you improve your internal state and you decrease your cravings. So we've talked about going outside also in the context of sleep maintenance. And that would be really useful to take this up if this is something that you haven't quite managed to incorporate yet. So I also want to mention one last thing, and that is that we sometimes crave foods that have a component that we are missing. For example, people will crave chocolate. Sometimes you just need the magnesium, but it's actually chocolate that you're eating. Sometimes when you're eating bread, you're actually looking for nitrogen that you would find mostly in protein. Sometimes you will, if you're an ice chewer, people are ice chewers sometimes. Sometimes that means that the person is missing iron. Or if you only like cold things, sometimes people will be actually after that because there's manganese in some of those things. So there are actually other things that you might be looking at for specific foods. But if that's the case, it won't be a craving like where you're hunting in the pantry for anything you can find. It'll be a specific thing that you're usually looking for. So that is a possibility, but it's a rarer possibility that people are that tuned in, I think, personally. So I wanted to let you know, so those of you who are already in the Align Reset community know that we're going to have a cravings workshop. So I am hopefully more than tentatively booking that for March the 30th. And it's going to take us about 3 hours, possibly a little bit more. I'm going to actually put up a registration link for that on the event page and email it to everybody. So if some of these things are really ringing true to you and you'd like to kind of do some more examination of maybe like what neurotransmitters could be affecting you, what sort of things are you noticing that you're craving all the time? Like those things would be really useful pieces of information to bring to this workshop so that we can work through it and see if we can figure out ways to improve your capacity to resist a craving other than somebody asked me earlier by email, all he wants is a hamburger. And I said, yes, I understand. And the odd hamburger is not going to kill us. However, hamburgers every day probably will. So watch for that registration link to come up this weekend by email. Or if you're interested, you can also email me and make sure you're on that list so I don't miss you the odd time we have problems with the emails, as you well know. Now, we only have a couple of webinars left this year. There is going to be a webinar in May about the power of plants. I will likely hold a botanical medicine course, so basically herbal medicine for the home in the following months. And I'm going to try to bring out herb walks again this year. We have done herb walks in the season where we can see the most herbs, which is usually July. That's the best time around Calgary and the Rockies to go and take a look at plants. So if you're interested in that, I will talk about that next time. But I'm also just going to talk generally about the power of plants and all the things that they do that you have no idea that they do. And I will have one more workshop in March, or one more webinar in March. It's under the Helping Dr. Mom offerings, and it's functional autism awareness. So people are becoming more aware of the autistic spectrum disorders, and there's a lot more acknowledgement, acceptance of people who are neuroatypical in our culture nowadays. And I'm going to be excited to present about this particular concern in March. And also I may present again about this in the fall because I am excitingly going to be attending an in-depth neurodiversity medicine workshop in May. So we may also see some extra material come back after I have a chance to see some of the people who are best known for their work with neuroatypical people. That might include you. And so this is our end. So thank you. So thank you for showing up. You know, I hope everybody has a better understanding of cravings and has a little craving to explore further. And thank you. I really appreciate everybody showing up. It's amazing to me how many people show up to learn. And I'm happy to take questions if there are some. Or is everybody going to go get a bag of chips now? It's always a possibility. Now that we've talked about everything and shown you pictures of donuts, it's not out of the picture. So great. Well, I hope that you'll all come and maybe if this cravings are a real problem for you, that you'll come to the workshop and work through this a little bit, because it's really, really useful to know what it is you're craving and why you're craving it. And if there's something that's actually going on for you medically that you start to appreciate that that's actually what's happening so that you can do something about it. You crave chocolate after dinner. I think 1 square of dark chocolate that's a pass, Rhonda. You're good. Eat the 1 square of chocolate after dinner. Just don't eat the whole bar. Plus, that's very useful for your microbiome, chocolate, like the cacao bean. So the closer it is to like high percentage chocolate or cacao, that actually is a beautiful support to your microbiome. So there you go. Excuses to eat chocolate. I also did a whole hour webinar on chocolate. If you missed it, you should go and take a look at that. I've done a lot of webinars for you guys over the years. There's a whole library, so go check it out. All right, take care, guys. It's great to see you all. We'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks for watching. I love to connect to my patient community to inform and inspire, and I hope you'll join us again in the near future. Don't forget to check out whole-life-medicine.com for more webinars and events.